Hello, YouTube. This is Peter, and I'm back with a culturally mandated review of Star Wars: The Last Jedi, Skywalker, Rise of the Revenge of the Sith, Hope, or something like that. Rise of the Skywalker. And before I can really get into this review, I feel the need to give a long preamble. Why? Because of where the public and the culture at large is with Star Wars. I feel the need to put all my cards on the table so that you don't think that I'm some sort of fanboy this or some shill for Disney that or whatever have you. So, as someone born in 1984 who grew up with Star Wars, and much of my childhood was in the era of the 90s revival of Star Wars and the expanded universe and the release of the special editions and then the release of the prequels in my later teen years and early 20s. I loved Star Wars growing up, and it will always have a special place in my heart. The music of John Williams still, even in these modern trilogies, stirs something in me. In fact, perhaps that is the only thing in these movies that gives me a stirring feeling of nostalgia, is the music of John Williams. However, my love of Star Wars peaked on exactly May 19th, 1999. Yes, I am one of those people who was disappointed in the prequel movies, to say the least. Now, I know there's been this revision about the prequels, that they're better than we remember, and how a lot of people really liked the prequels when they first came out. And I'll tell you a little secret. I saw The Phantom Menace 3 times in the theater. Now, it's partly, I don't want to say coincidence, but I happened to tag along in the successive viewings with family members and other people going to see the movies. And being a 16 at the time, I was given the opportunity to go see these movies again, and I jumped at the chance, but it was not because I personally begged to go see these movies repeatedly. Nonetheless, my cousin and I used to make these videos with action figures when we were kids. And as soon as the movie came out and we saw it, we were making fun of The Phantom Menace. And we were disappointed in the movie, as many people were. And from there on, as the subsequent prequels came out, I started to become more and more disenfranchised with Star Wars. And as I grew older and more cynical in my outlook on the world changed, and as I studied world religions and started to understand more complex versions of the vagaries of what is being sold, the sort of watered-down Buddhism and 70s New Ageism of Star Wars, I look at the movies from an older, more cynical perspective. But there's still a part of me that loves the original trilogy, that doesn't hate the prequels as it is fashionable to do. Although one of the biggest condemnations I could say about The Phantom Menace is that when I've tried to watch it years later as an adult, I usually find myself losing interest. I just find it, by and large, kind of boring. So I found myself at a point as an adult where I'm really not all that invested in Star Wars, but there's a part of me that also loves it. Going into these new movies with The Force Awakens, I read spoilers online for The Force Awakens before it came out, and the spoilers ended up being, like 98% accurate. I rewatched the original trilogy before seeing The Force Awakens, and I found myself as a 30-something adult identifying more with the mentor characters like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda in these movies, whereas as a kid, I was more apt to identify with somebody like Luke Skywalker. And I remember particularly in the scene where Obi-Wan Kenobi lies to Luke about what happened to his father. I remember looking at young, naive Luke Skywalker in that scene and thinking, man, no wonder he lied to this kid. If he told him the truth, his head would just explode. It's a total you can't handle the truth kind of moment. And just taking Yoda's side and taking Obi-Wan Kenobi's side, rewatching these movies before the new movies came out. So watching The Force Awakens, I'm not looking for a role model in a character like Rey. I don't really care if, for example, they make the new Jedi of this movie a woman, because I'm just not in the age demographic to identify with the protagonists of the movie. As I've said, I more identify with the mentors at this period of my life. And I was willing to take the new movies for what they were. As I explained in my review of The Last Jedi, I didn't hate the movie, as so many people have come out and made this whole cottage industry of trashing The Last Jedi, but there was a definite point in the movie where I said to myself, this movie isn't over yet. Like, come on, let's wrap this up here, people. I'm looking at my watch, realizing there's another 25 minutes for the movie when it really should have ended from a story point of view. I felt the movie had pacing and structural problems. I thought it was thematically muddled. I felt that they could have done more with the Rey character. As far as the infamous Canto Bight scene, I have to make a confession here. That was the part of the movie where I walked out to use the bathroom, so I missed most of it. And I have not rewatched The Last Jedi since I saw it in the theaters. So maybe it is this terrible thing that ruins the movie, but I was off emptying my bladder. Okay, so with The Rise of Skywalker, I went into this movie having read spoilers, which again were 98% accurate, and I was willing, knowing what I already read about the movie, I read the spoilers, I saw many of the negative reviews online, because this movie, I did not go see this movie until, I think, the Monday after it came out, and I went in with very low expectations. And I have to say that I was basically pleasantly surprised. I did not love this movie. I was not like, wow, this is a cinematic masterpiece, a riveting movie experience. But I felt that a lot of the negative criticism was somewhere between a bit overblown and rooting for this movie to fail. Because part of the reason that I've gone into the long preamble about laying my cards on the table in my history of Star Wars and what kind of Star Wars fan that I am, I feel that there are more than a few people who are determined to see this movie fail. They revel in the disappointing box office performance. They're trying to pick apart this movie. They revel in all the negative reviews. And I just don't go in for that. I especially don't go in for all the people who are like, oh my God, the SJW agenda of Kathleen Kennedy. All of that gets a bit tired and annoying to listen to after a while. That entire style of video, I find myself rolling my eyes at. And that's just another card I've laid on the table, so you know where I'm coming from with a lot of this. So a lot of people want to see this movie fail and are just trying to pick apart everything about it even before it's released. They're reveling in all the negative reviews and the underwhelming box office performance. And I don't think it's as bad as all that, but it's definitely not perfect. My two main thoughts going and watching this movie were, number one, it reminded me more of an Indiana Jones movie where we're after a MacGuffin and we got to go to location A, which leads to location B, which leads to location C, etc. Towards the end of the movie, the climax of the movie, it stopped reminding me of Indiana Jones and started reminding me of Independence Day. There's we got to shoot the death laser thing on the bottom of the ship, and Poe gives this Bill Pullman-esque, we will not go quietly into the night type of speech. It was very Independence Day to me. And I thought that they could have trimmed the MacGuffin hunt portion of the movie down by one location or one set piece. and tightened up the movie by maybe 20, 25 minutes. And that would have made the movie better. Because for as much as people say that it's muddled and it has too many ideas, there was a definite point in this movie where I felt, okay, we need to move things along here. Whereas with The Last Jedi, there was a point where I was like, what do you mean this isn't done yet? You've clearly reached a climax and you got like 25 minutes left in the movie. There was a point, maybe a third or a half of the way through the movie, where I was like, okay, let's move this along here. So again, it had some pacing and structural issues with the story, but I didn't feel that it was the complete mess that a lot of people described it to be. The ending of the movie, that was another thing that they could have tightened up, was it was a bit convoluted where, okay, the Wayfinder thing's on this beacon thing, on this tower, and okay, now it's been transferred to the command ship. That's a bit convoluted. I think they should have kept it simple, stupid. Make one clear objective and stick with that. And that would have worked a lot better from the audience point of view, because they established that the thing is on the tower and they got to blow up the tower. Oh, and then they just snap of the fingers, they changed the location of the thing that they got to destroy. And it's kind of like, what was the point of that? It just felt unnecessary and adding needless convolution and plot contrivance. So as far as the overarching character arcs of the trilogy, it was fine. Honestly, I reached a point, I think, with The Last Jedi where I was just kind of meh about these characters. Rey seemed to me like a much more interesting character in The Force Awakens, and then they derailed a lot of character development with The Last Jedi. I have to say that honestly, looking back on it now. And some of the criticism that it gets in that regard, I have to say that it probably deserves, because I was waiting throughout that entire movie for them to do something interesting with the character of Rey after her setup in The Force Awakens, and The Last Jedi just kind of didn't do much with her other than this weird connection with Kylo Ren thing, which for all the people saying, oh, this is a new progressive Star Wars character, etc., look at it this way. She is basically a young woman who meets a brooding bad boy with numerous deal-breaking red flags and says, he's just misunderstood. I can change him. I felt in The Last Jedi, when she goes to try and confront Kylo Ren and, turn him back to the good side, they just hadn't sold the character dynamic between them for me at that point. I know there's a lot of people that ship those two characters, and a lot of it just seems built on that, like, oh, now kiss sort of thing, which you did get in this movie. Obviously, Rise of Skywalker did have what people are calling fan service. I watched a video recently, and it was from 2 years ago, and one person was saying, oh, of all these theories, what if she's a Palpatine? Well, guess what, kids? She is. I think that I can honestly imagine the screenwriters and the directors of this movie combing through the internet, like, what fan theories can we validate in this movie? They're just combing the internet for ideas of what to do with this movie and what to do with these characters in a way that the audience will find satisfying. And in the original trilogy, I think one of the main things that saves Return of the Jedi from its silliness towards the end with the Ewoks and all of that, and its long first third of the movie that's just an entire rescue sequence that it honestly is plot hole central. The whole let's send people in one at a time to rescue Han from Jabba the Hutt, right? That didn't make a lot of sense. The Ewoks are dumb. But what really saves that movie is the confrontation between Luke and Vader and the Emperor. That's really the highlight of the movie, whereas in this, it's kind of like, oh, by the way, you're my granddaughter with Rey and the Emperor. And you don't really get the sense that there was any serious threat that she's going to turn to the dark side. The emotional drama just didn't feel like it's there. It just seemed like they thought, let's bring back the Emperor and let's have Rey be his granddaughter because the fans would like that. That's very Star Wars. and they're just trying to create this ad hoc conclusion to something that I doubt they thought out all that well to begin with. Kylo Ren's redemption arc also just felt par for the course for Star Wars. I think that overall, I found these movies enjoyable enough when I was watching them, but I don't feel that I'm going to be rewatching them over and over and over again like I have the original movies. I don't feel that they have the rewatch value of the original movies or something that's going to be a major part of my life. It's just another part of an ongoing franchise in a world full of remakes and milking it for all it's worth Hollywood that we have nowadays. On the other hand, I don't join in with the let's all shit on Disney's Star Wars mentality that much of the fandom has become, because I basically think that for some people, diehard fans of something like Star Wars, it would be almost impossible to make them happy. Nothing's going to quite deliver on their childhood nostalgia, their expectations for people who have invested countless hours reading all sorts of extended universe, expanded universe, whatever they call it nowadays, of Star Wars and are just really into the lore. I think that that's a combination of people who are hard to satisfy, especially because many of them are now older and look at the world from a different point of view. As I was saying before, as I rewatched the original trilogy before I watched The Force Awakens, I found myself identifying more with the mentor characters, and my perspective had shifted. And you're just not going to look at any movie, be it a Star Wars movie or a Disney movie, what have you, the way that you looked at a movie when you were a kid. And I love Star Wars, but it's also because at least partially because it was a part of my childhood. Had I discovered the movies when I was older, I might still have loved them. I had a friend who I was friends with from kindergarten, and unbeknownst to me, he had never seen Star Wars. And then when he saw Star Wars as a teenager, he suddenly loved the movies. But I think he was still at an age where he was the target audience. Now, I had a girlfriend when I was 18 or 19, and she had never seen the Star Wars movies. And I showed her the first two prequels and then the original trilogy, and it was amazingly satisfying to see her reaction to the "No, I am your father" line, because the third movie hadn't come out yet, so she was completely stunned by this revelation of Darth Vader being Anakin Skywalker. But I don't think she would ever love Star Wars the way some, having seeing it at like 19 years old, you're probably never going to love it the way that you did if you saw it when you were like 4 or 5, like I did. I might have been even younger than that, but I just don't remember seeing it. Because your perspective on a movie, how you feel about it, is going to be in no small part to the age and the mindset you had when you saw it. And you're never going to be able to recapture or relive that. Honestly, though, I think that there's a certain segment of the fandom that seriously needs to just chill out. Because, as I said, when I went into this movie, I had low expectations, but I put myself into the mindset where I just tried to appreciate it for what it was, and I found it to be better than a lot of people made it out to be. It was perfectly enjoyable to watch. There were plot holes, but it didn't bother me that much. There were pacing issues, but every movie has story, pacing issues, plot holes, etc. And there just seems to be a segment of the Star Wars fandom that is, I hate to use the phrase, but toxic. They're just out to revel in any perceived failure of the brand because it has disappointed them. And you know what? They're just movies. Even the original trilogy are just movies. They have their flaws. They have their awkwardness and datedness as well. And all of this talk about the agenda of Star Wars and Kathleen Kennedy and the SJW agenda, like I said, I honestly just have to roll my eyes at that. This is something that really deserves a video unto itself, but there seems to be certain people who believe that there should be this thing called pure entertainment that is entirely apolitical. And short answer is, I don't know if there is such a thing. Now, there's different intensities of politics, different ways you can incorporate politics into something and make it more overt or covert. But the bottom line is, Star Wars has always been political. You have hippies fighting space Nazis, and it was very much in the cultural milieu of the 70s or the late 90s, early 2000s. There's references, subtle references to things like Nixon and the Iraq War and the original trilogy and the prequels. And things like the Force, a lot of it just seems like watered down versions of this sort of new age spirituality, which was, a dime a dozen in the 60s and 70s. That was very much part of the cultural milieu of the time. And it's not as apolitical as you think. It never has been. And I'm, in all honesty, not really sure you could have something that's entirely apolitical. It might have politics that you don't notice. It may be less overt than, Soviet propaganda calling for the workers of the world to unite or something like that, right? So overall, I enjoyed the movie for what it was. I didn't expect it to be the fulfillment of all of my childhood hopes and dreams for what the Star Wars franchise would be, because that honestly died 20 years ago. But I don't see it as a perfect film either. It just is what it is. It's entertainment put out by a mass corporation, and I can enjoy it and move on. So that's my video. Have a good whatever time it is, and may the Force be with you.